everyone out there, and welcome to another session of Mita's Deep Dive Express modules. My name is Caleb Tice from Canna Owners, and I'm going to be your host here today. The Mita Deep Dive modules are brought by our gracious sponsor, 420 Collections. There's two brands underneath that umbrella. First one is 420 Medibles, some deliciously potent edibles that are available at dispensaries throughout the great state of Arizona, as well as 420 Skincare, which is their CBD infused topical line that is available nationwide. So we have a great topic here today, and one that is instrumental to the cannabis industry existing. We are going to do a deep dive into compliance. So we're very fortunate today. We have two experts in the area of compliance that we're going to go ahead and have a great discussion here today. So I want to go ahead and introduce first. We have Mr. Mark Slaw from iComply Cannabis. You want to introduce yourself a bit, Mark? Give a little background.
Sure. I'm Mark Slaw, the CEO and founder of iComply. iComply has been around since 2011, the oldest cannabis compliance company in the game, having serviced over 300 clients in 15 plus markets nationally and internationally over the last 10 years of our business. So we really specialize in doing all the boring, non-fun, non-sexy things in marijuana that are fundamentally important to running a successful cannabis business. So we'll talk a lot today about integrity, compliance processes and people, and ongoing measures and management of compliance. That all falls under the realm of what iComply has done.
Thank you, Mark. Yeah, you're going to be able to give a great perspective, having operated in multiple markets, multiple countries, and that's going to be definitely something we're going to talk about, of those nuances and how that stuff's different. So we also have Mrs. Josephine Giordano from Beach Fleischman. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Thanks for having me, Caleb, and good to see you again, Mark.
You
I'm
too.
Giordano. I'm a CPA and director and National Cannabis Task Force leader for Beach Fleischman. We're one of Arizona's largest locally owned CPA firms. We have clients all over the US, Canada, and Mexico, and we service the cannabis industry throughout the United States. We provide tax, audit, business valuation, operational and financial consulting, management turnaround, and any type of litigation support within the industry.
Nice. Yeah, the other side of it, the funds and the compliance, and unfortunately, when sometimes things don't go as planned with partners and with business. So thank you for being here. I'm really excited for our discussion today. So we're going to go ahead and dive in. I mean, compliance is one of those words. We hear it every day in multiple capacities of you got to comply, it's in compliance, out of compliance. Josephine, what is business compliance? Like what does that encompass?
You know, and it's such a broad word, but it's used throughout every industry. I mean, there's always rules that need to be complied to. So basically, I would say, you know, compliance is where businesses within industries, you know, have to accord to certain guidelines and or rules and or regulations that are mandated, you know, either on a federal level, on a state level, or a local jurisdictional level. So, you know, they can encompass a lot of different things, which we're going to talk about. In the cannabis area, you know, it's going to range from, you know, HIPAA compliance to Department of Health compliance, but every state has different compliance measures that they need to adhere to.
Got it. So yeah, Mark, so this the non-sexy side of business, as you put it. So and certainly, I mean, it's you've gone in that direction. So compliance is your suit. Why is it important? Like, what does it mean to you as you're going in and evaluating a situation?
Yeah. So, I mean, when I started, the compliance was a foreign concept. I mean, it was like, there were no rules. It was just right. We'd get our patients, you know, a bong hit on the way out the door. I mean, it was the wild, wild west. In some states like Oklahoma, for example, it really still is. So compliance in some places is a foreign concept. In other places, it's kind of a buzzword in the industry. So what does it really mean, though? And very few people take the time to unpack what compliance really means. It's complicated. It's nuanced. It's multiple different agencies coming at you with multiple different rules. And that's what I'm saying. What most people tend to just almost get in panic mode and shut down around compliance because it's such a large buzzword that takes a lot to untangle and unpack. I think the easiest way to say is compliance is how you have to run your business. So, people are all, one of the jokes I make is you put two chefs in the kitchen, you're going to ruin the recipe. You put two master growers in the grow, you're going to end up ruining the operation or the end result of the product in marijuana. But the reality is, regardless of who you put into those positions, they have to adhere to the way that business has to be done, right? So from a compliance officer standpoint, from someone who comes in and helps operations mold those rules into their day-to-day business, it's just the way you have to do business. And then everything else, once you have that fundamental piece in place and it's being consistently adhered to, then you can kind of explore with, okay, let's extract this way or grow this way, right? As long as it still meets the basic requirements of safety, the rules, regulations, and all the various agencies that come bearing down on the cannabis industry. So for me, compliance is just the fundamental way you have to do your cannabis business.
It's foundation. It's the framework. It's the it's the rules of the game. I mean, I like to use the sports analogy of just like, I can go here, I have to dribble this way, I can only go this, you have to follow those set rules, and it helps everybody know what the playing field is also.
Exactly. That's a really good metaphor to use, Caleb, because the X's and O's can go in all different directions, but the reality is everybody still has to play by those rules.
Yep.
And bending or breaking those rules gets you penalties and gets you in trouble and can make you lose your business. So it's really important that you understand also the costs of non-compliance, which is a whole other side of this scale if you're not being compliant.
Yep. So, but before we dive into the specifics on cannabis, the business world in the modern age is a compliant environment. So what are some of the compliance requirements for all businesses, that it doesn't matter what industry that you're in?
Yeah, I mean, Josephine, certainly as a CPA, you're probably dealing with a lot of labor compliance and just regular compliance. I'm more than happy to hand that one off to you.
Thanks, Mark. Well, there's so many different areas of compliance. And like I said before, it's ranging from federal, state, jurisdictional level. But what we deal, and let me just say this just to start too, because I wanted to quote and a good source for a lot of information related to compliance and reducing risk and having a compliance framework. You can find on the Association of Commercial Cannabis Experts. They're a great resource for that type of information.
I'm a member and certified.
Yes, me too. Yay. So let me just quote, because I thought I went to look up what their definition, and this is a great definition. I think Mark touched on this about penalties, but compliance risk, so the risk of not being in compliance is the exposure to legal penalties, financial forfeiture, and material loss an organization faces when it fails to act in accordance with industry laws and regulations, internal policies, and or prescribed best practices. So, I mean, that really just says it in a nutshell, because that risk of financial and or material loss is great on all these levels. And the penalties could be very excessive, whether it be on the health care side of it, departments of health related to it, or if we're dealing on the tax side and dealing with, non-adherence to tax compliance, whether it be on a state or, on the IRS federal level. So there's a lot going on there. I mean, obviously we have compliance when it comes to employee management and OSHA and things like that. So there are different areas that have to be addressed and to make sure that framework is in place to minimize the risk of compliance and or then resulting in these penalties or forfeitures.
Okay.
Yeah,
So Mark, if you want to take that question.
Just to piggyback on what Justine said, like if you're in any other type of business, you're going to have to deal with the basics, right? And there's sort of a spectrum, right? You've got lightly regulated business on one side, and then you've got probably nuclear waste on the other side, right? Mm-hmm. Very heavily regulated businesses. Cannabis tends to be over here with very heavily regulated business. Mm-hmm. So yeah, if you're like shipping stuff on eBay, look, there may be a sales tax license you got to adhere to. You may not even have employees, so you don't have to worry about labor law. You're just pulling out your own money, but you do have to worry about tax compliance, right? Or if you do have employees, now you start getting into OSHA, you start getting into other areas of safety. But if you're really not doing anything that involves heavy equipment, chemicals, etc., maybe you don't. Maybe there isn't even an office space because everybody works from home. So it's sort of like the lightly regulated world of what that needs to look like, but you still have HR policies and procedures. All these still same concepts still apply anytime you add somebody more than yourself working in a business. So there's always the sort of lightly regulated stuff, and that comes into employment laws, state laws on unemployment, unemployment insurance. You have to pay a variety of different taxes, state and local, that you may or may not have to pay if you're service-based or if you're selling a product, right? So the world of that everybody has to adhere to, regardless of the type of business you're in. But it's key to understand that the type of business you're in and the legal structure that you set yourself up as, right? An LLC versus an S corp versus a nonprofit, or anything else, is going to also determine the type of compliance you have to follow. So there's definitely going to be a need, even at the very beginning of formulating your business, to at least consult with an attorney, consult with an accounting firm like Josephine's, and understand, right, what am I getting myself into, and what is it that I'm going to have to adhere to. Now, if you're an ancillary company servicing the cannabis industry like myself or Josephine, it's much easier to deal with compliance, right? There's not a lot of regulations around us. Although I do have to comply with responsible vendor training designations and maintaining books and records on behalf of the industry for things that are sort of overlapping with what the industry has to deal with the regulators. Because then you start getting into more complex and nuanced regulation. Once you have a license, forget about it. A license isn't a right and privilege to do something; it's the permission to do so. So if you're running a restaurant, you have to adhere to, the food safety standards and making sure your temperatures on your refrigerators are set right, so you don't grow mold and bacteria and end up getting somebody sick. The same type of intuition here applies to cannabis, where we've got test results to hold us accountable. So we have to operate in a certain way. And because you have a license, and it's just like your driver's license, it's a privilege, it's not a right. That can be revoked if you're not following the rules, right? If you consistently lose points on your license when you're a motorist, everybody out there usually has a driver's license, you can have your license suspended or revoked. So it's a very similar concept here, but we're just talking about restaurants, or whether we're talking about a marijuana grow or a dispensary, right? If you keep serving underage patients, hey, guess what? You're probably not going to be in business very long. So it's pretty important to make sure that a lot of those really heavy rules, we start talking about penalties, to Josephine's point, especially in cannabis. I mean, the worst of the worst stuff that you're like, if somebody did this, I'd have to fire them, right? Selling to non-patients, selling to kids, definitely selling out the back door, getting your marijuana from California and reselling it in your dispensary. I mean, stuff like that is pretty bad if you're not in California, and will definitely warrant you being shut down, right? It would be like taking your car and being completely reckless on the road. You probably shouldn't be on the road.
And one thing that you said, Mark, that, and I just want to emphasize again, when you're talking about safety, and safety within your own organization for the people that work for you, that's one thing. But then, it's really important to remember it's safety to the public. So, what are we doing the reason these rules and regulations are in place is to protect the public, from these other things that go on. So to make sure you're compliant helps deter, those type of problems in the future, where the public can rely on what you're presenting and the products that you're selling, and feel comfortable that, you're adhering to testing laws, you're, adhering to the other regulations that are in place.
It's risk mitigation. I mean, that's a big part of it, is just ultimately and it's whether it's risk mitigation for you internally, so you can help to avoid things internally, or risk mitigation for your customers, for the public at large. I mean, a lot of the things with cannabis have to do with keeping it out of kids' hands, helping to ensure that none of the funds are being funneled into criminal enterprises like they had been in the past. So it's really, when you look at it, most of the compliance requirements, there's a problem that they're solving, or they're being put in place as a deterrent from some nefarious activity. I mean, that's really how I help to wrap my head around it, of like, oh, that's why these things are here in place.
Yeah, and it's really important that even your staff understands the intuition behind that. Otherwise, they're gonna be like, that's a dumb rule, I don't have to follow it. But they're really, like you said, they're done by design, and they change every single year. There's like a regulatory clockwork that starts with legislation, ends with rulemaking, implementing new rules. That happens in every single market every single year. So if your staff doesn't really understand like why they're doing what they're supposed to be doing, then it can lead to a lot of slipping up and not following compliance. So Caleb, you're absolutely right on point. It's really important to understand the intuition or the legislative intent or the regulatory intent that the regulators are coming at this with, so that people can go, oh, wait, we are just doing what's best for our business. We are doing what's best for the industry and the health and safety of the public.
Yep. And I think that's a big part of why there's that evolution, is almost like you can see that the regulations, there's a response, especially with the new industry of, well, this works, or wait, maybe this doesn't quite work. I know up here in Oregon, they just had an overhaul that made some pretty significant changes as far as like license to license transfers and other things that you can do. And I mean, testing just went into effect in Arizona in the last 12 months. So
yeah, but a lot of markets are still behind, right? Like,
Yeah.
we think we got it all together, and the reality is like even the most evolved markets like Colorado are going to change every single year. And all we can do is kind of set the example for other markets to follow. But yeah, imagine that you're buying as a immune compromised patient, you're buying cannabis product without testing. It's like, whoa, the risks that are being out there right now is pretty crazy. And it's, one class action lawsuit away, one giant recall away, right? These real world impacts. If someone gets sick, the idea is that we're helping people with cannabis medicine, not getting them more sick. And if that were to happen, I mean, it's a really big issue against the cannabis business in one of these new markets that say doesn't have testing or has bad testing standards among the labs.
Or loose testing standards,
Yeah.
where they're there, they look good on paper, but they're really not, they're a little too loose, so.
There's no teeth.
For a reason.
Yeah.
They're there for a reason. So that's why, we need to adhere to them.
Absolutely. That's why compliance is the name of the game, for sure.
That's right.
Yep.
Such a buzzword in the industry.
Are there some common things that you have encountered? So just thinking for the new business owner, somebody looking at starting, what are some common things that either get overlooked or just that you see that you have to address?
Well, I mean, Mark probably sees a lot more than I do. I see a lot of it on the financial side and the tax side. Nobody likes nobody likes the 280 E issues. Nobody likes the IRS coming in and doing the audits and finding a ton of stuff there because you're not in compliance with 280 E. But regardless, the rules are there. The tax law is set, it's there. Maybe it'll change in the future, but right now this is what it is. So based on what it is, we need to comply. I mean, the name of the game is not how are we going to circumvent, how are we going to, and, I hear this a lot from a lot of different people from a lot of different industries. Remember being having a compliance program doesn't really, and I'll explain this after, but it really doesn't add value to your bottom line, right? It's not like you're going out and trying to, you're marketing, you're advertising, you're trying to bring money in and generate revenues. It's not generating revenues. So that's why business owners tend to leave it to the wayside, because it's like, oh my gosh, I got to waste all my time doing this. I really need to generate revenues so that I can pay my employees and, make a return on my investment. But that's the problem. So it's making sure it's not going to add value, but it will add value in the long run, because if you're, going back to what we're saying, if you're not in compliance and then you get slapped with penalties, or even worse, you get, having your license pulled, well, guess what? You're not going to be generating any revenues to do anything. So that's the flip side of that. So stop trying to circumvent or think about circumventing the rules. Adhere to them, do what you need to do, have transparency in your information, and be able to present that to regulators, taxing authorities, and the public.
Yeah, I love what you said there, Josephine, because every other heavily regulated industry can earmark about 4 to 5% of revenues to just going towards a compliance budget. And in this industry, you'd be surprised how many people do not have a compliance budget. And they think it's legal. And it's like, no, your attorney is very different than your compliance. It's like the difference between, your CFO and your accountant. I mean, they're similar, but they're very different. and they play different roles. So it's a really great point. And I would say that, like, in terms of the common things that we see, we've sort of categorized it to depending on where the market is and also the evolution of the client. So everybody's going to have common problems, like Josephine said, in just setting up the right chart of accounts, getting right the internal organizational structure set in place, making sure they have accountable policies and procedures, that they're holding people to task, right? They have transparency on that, sort of the management issues. But we generally tend to categorize people according to the evolution of their business. So there's kind of like New York right now, right? We have these pre-market applicants that want to be interested in New York. They know legalization is coming, but there's no application yet. There's no way to get into the business yet. But that doesn't mean you can't start working on operational compliance and start working on preparing yourself for a successful application. So the common compliance challenges there are going to be, what does the legislative framework say? What do we know we're going to have to do? What do we know that we absolutely cannot do? And how do we start business planning? I think we already did a webinar series on business planning, but all that can happen for these pre-market applicants before they get into the business. And then you have sort of the application clients, right? So now there is an application available. We've put together a team. We've done all of our groundwork, but freaking A, we have to put together a giant application. And these applications can take a good consultant like us, a team of 4 or 5 people, 300 to 500 hours to put together easily. I mean, it's no walk in the park, especially if you're going for more than one application. So you increase your chances of being able to win and actually get into the marketplace with these very competitive merit-based applications. There's a lot that goes into compliance, a lot of planning, a lot of writing that goes into how your business is now going to perform based on that business plan, based on any final rules and regulations and the limitations of the application. And then from there, you have people that win licenses, right? New market entrants that are just now getting their businesses set up. They have that like sort of 90-day build out time frame after they get their license awarded to them. And that's where the real compliance rubber hits the road, because now you've got to develop your SOPs. You've got to chart out your org chart. You've got to get your job descriptions written up and your roles and responsibilities, and start hiring, right? And putting people in place, and then training and developing those people to all of those processes, documenting all of that, and making sure that they adhere to it before you actually have marijuana come in the door. And the people that do it the right way, are the most successful clients we work with, because they just get from the beginning that, I don't know, maybe like building out to GMP and knowing that, that's what's going to be in the future is like makes sense to do now, rather than have to try to retrofit your entire operation later, right? And to make sure that they have the right people and that they're operating underneath the budgets that were planned the whole time. So it's sort of the right way to do this. And then we have people that are in business for like a year or less, and we have to make sure that the train is staying on the tracks. Mm-hmm. So those folks may have never built the tracks in the first place. They're trying to drive the train. And then if they are driving the train, they need to start measuring and managing whether or not all that training, all those processes they put in place are working. And that critical 12 months is really key to then honing in and creating consistent culture around compliance that's going to adhere to it. And then we have clients sort of in the last category, which have been around 12 months plus. Maybe they're older veterans in the industry. They've been working well enough and they think it's great. And oftentimes they're the ones with the biggest compliance problems, because they become complacent and they don't really realize how far off the tracks they are, or whether or not they're even heading in the right destination. So we work with clients across that spectrum. And we kind of know what they need and want and desire after a few questions, just depending on sort of where they are, where their market is, and what their sort of ultimate objectives are, but also how are they currently managing compliance now? Is it even a big concern to them? I think, Josephine, you hit on the nail on the head. There's a lot of people that resist that and think of it as a cost. And I think of it as an investment. If you're going to invest into your company for compliance, you've already built that extra valuation on your exit long before anybody has to come in and do due diligence on you, right? If you have more paperwork than the regulators have, or more paperwork than the potential buyer of your company later on, you're in a good place, and it's all third-party validated and verified. That's just normal practice in oil and gas, banking, any other heavily regulated industry, hospitals, pharmaceuticals, pick one. They all do third-party validation and operational compliance management through companies like iComply in their own field.
And let me just say, even with the standard operating procedures, I mean, what I find is that potential clients, business operators, especially ones starting out, the concept of standard operating procedures Sometimes they think, oh, well, let me just go cut and paste, some template of procedures, into a Word document. I have it, I put it in a binder and I put it on the shelf. That's not it. And that's not the purpose here. I mean, one of the biggest heavily regulated industries is banking. And I remember, I'm not going to say what year, but back when I first started in my career in banking, and I was in the audit department. So, one of the first things they did when the first day on the job, they handed me binders upon binders of standard operating procedures for the bank. And they're like, okay, read this and then ask us any questions. But, anytime any of the staff had questions about anything, well, how is this supposed to work? How is regulation E or, whatever apply to, our bank? All those things, they would always say, go back to the manual, back to the procedures and look it up. We could discuss it, but all the detail and all the accountability is right there in those standard operating procedures. So they really need to be a useful tool, for the operator, not just something that's going to collect dust and never get looked at again.
So it's not something to check a box. Definitely not.
No.
I
Yeah,
love that Mark
exactly.
said that first 12 months of the evolution. I learned
Mhm.
that very quickly. It's especially like with my first dispensary of mindset when you're working on a project or something, let's say for school or other things where it's like, yeah, you turn it in, it's done. Okay, all right. So I created a whole bunch of procedures and immediately in the first 2 weeks saw I need to change this. That's not working. We're missing information. And it took me a little while to kind of get into that mindset of like, oh, this is a constant evolution. I can't ever think that this is done because the business world changes. So whether or not from a compliance perspective, maybe like Mark was saying earlier, that it hits all of those minimum compliance, but we want to do it differently because it's more efficient while still hitting all of those compliance pieces. That's
That's
part of
like
the
you
switch
need
you
an
learn.
SOP for changing your SOPs. And that's not even a
Yeah.
joke. Like that's literally, it's
Yeah.
called document control and document change management.
I love it.
And so all of that's really important. Tracking your version control numbers so you know which one's there, and then communicating it down the line, right? So there
I
needs
was
to be
just going to
an
say that
analysis.
that's what they forget to do.
Yeah.
Of course, they're going to evolve as we're going along, but how are you then communicating that change?
Yeah. I
to
think
your
one of the
staff?
biggest mistakes that owners make is putting us all on the shoulders of their manager and being like, yeah, they're
Mhm.
handling compliance, and they have no idea the complexity or the nuance of unpacking that box. So even just having like you have a good accounting firm to help you with your bookkeeping, or you literally offload a lot of that. Same type of thing. You need to make sure that when you change it, not if, but when, right? You're reviewing it at least annually when the rules change, so you know what needs to be changed, what is not being adhered to, what people aren't following. And then there's the implementation, the communication of it. And that means getting people's signatures that they know that this has changed and they agree and they've been retrained in the new process and they're going to adhere to it from then on out. Because once you have people's buy-in and consent, then you can actually start to hold them accountable to whether or not they follow the process and procedure. And again, that's really important when it comes down to quality assurance, quality control. If you're growing or you're doing manufacturing, you want to make sure people are doing the same thing every single time the same way. Otherwise, you're going to get a very different tasting edible on the other end of that, or maybe a different potency. You're going to fail testing. So a lot of these things, especially process validation testing, et cetera, all depend on really good SOPs and really good implementation of those SOPs.
And let's equate this all to, if we want to bring it down to dollars and cents, if we equate this to value. So like when we're doing a business valuation, you could have, you've got dispensary A, here, and then dispensary B down the block. They're both generating exactly the same amount of revenues. Well, are their values the same? Not necessarily, because now risk and their adherence to regulations and things like that become items that we look at in evaluation and say, oh, this entity has some issues they need to address, this, that, and the other thing. They're partially in compliance, but they need to work over. Those are all risk components that get identified and considered when doing evaluation, because anything that's going to drive risk up is going to drive value down. So you have to look at it that way. So one, they're both inverse to each other. Risk goes up, value comes down. there are investors out there, they're looking at the return on the investment. Are they going to they're going to want a higher return, on dispensary B, if their risk component is a lot higher due to lack of compliance, which is something that can be, worked on. And so a lot of times they just forget about it. And that's where bottom line, it equate to value. And then if we start, obviously if you start getting hit with penalties and things like that, that's affecting your cash flow and your bottom line. So that's going to have a major effect as well.
That's a really important concept for people to get, Josephine, from just a pure accounting standpoint, right? If you take care of a vehicle, you drive off the lot, you're going to be able to sell it for higher value later.
Right.
If you don't, and it's got, no maintenance done to it, et cetera, you're going to get beat up on price. I mean, it's as simple as that. But I wish people realize like the simplicity of that. You invest in compliance now, mitigate your risks the whole time. You're selling somebody a pristine, beautiful business, right? When you get out of the business, versus just letting it go to the wayside or not caring and running the risk of that car breaking down and being useless.
Well, think of an investor though. I mean, an investor wants to minimize risk. So, and they want a certain return for the risk that they're having to deal with, right? So if you're showing and you're transparent and you're compliant and your records are up to date and you did fine on your audit with the IRS and the Department of Revenue, the risk is coming down, the investors feel better, they'll want to invest in the company if you need any type of funding, they're going to look at that, even possible traditional lending, they're going to look at those risks. They're going to look if you're in compliance or not, or if you've been dinged for anything. Those are all going to count against you. So, but there's room for improvement. So just because you made mistakes and you didn't put those procedures in place or put in a strong internal control environment to reduce risk, there's still time for it. So you try to do it right in the front end, bring in the professionals you need to do it. But if you're already someone 12 months in, like you said, and and yes, they become complacent, you can still turn that around. You could still turn that around and you could still get back.
It usually takes us about 90 days to restore integrity in a business. And then after that, we can put them in a proactive position of managing compliance. Right. Instead of everybody's plan, like normally 95% of the industry, their plan is all reactive when it's a problem. Right. And reactive compliance is always more expensive than just doing it right the first time. Yep. And being proactive in managing it right.
And not just that, the opportunity cost. Think about what you're losing of having to fix that compliance, that you can't focus on generating more business,
right.
Or the fines that you get, or just it all comes down to risk mitigation.
And it starts snowballing into a nightmare once you're reacting. I mean, it's like one thing on top of another. That can be a disgruntled employee calling an anonymous tip line because they're just not happy with you. But if you don't have your stuff together, that's the difference between a 30-minute questionnaire from the inspectors or, a 3-hour full-scale audit, and you're facing a lot bigger issues because cannabis attorneys aren't cheap to go defend your license either.
Well, I was just going to say that reactive approach just starts racking up the bills for, because who are you going to call when you have to react to a situation that, you weren't compliant or, you didn't have the proper risk deterrent environment there. You're calling your attorney, you're calling your CPA, and so now here goes the cash flow out the door.
Yep.
Because, we didn't have those procedures in place.
I think we made a really great connection because I know, Mark, your statement of many people have that sort of misconception of it not impacting the bottom line. I mean, it clearly does.
It does when it does, very fast.
Yeah, very fast by helping to reduce expenses. And those are the two ways that a business makes money. You get more revenue in, you keep your expenses down. So I am a proponent of you are investing in your bottom line by avoiding those headaches and those bills and those things down the road.
Exactly. I mean, no business would operate without insurance. We kind of think that as a no-brainer. But, I tell people you put a penny on the dollar to protect the dollar. I mean, most other industries are 4 to 5% of your revenues every year. Our compliance packages come in at 1 or 2% maximum. So to me, it just makes sense, right? To just put a penny on your dollar, have that compliance budget. If you don't have one right now, get one. And just understand what that should look like, both internally or through external experts, to be able to create that infrastructure in place, that compliance program to mitigate those risks. And your business is going to run a lot more efficiently and effectively because of it. You're going to have less turnover. There's these other kind of costs of non-compliance that come out in the wash that are sometimes hard to calculate, but employees feel safer and more secure working somewhere where they know they're being protected, where they know that their expectations are clear, that they just get trained and there's a ladder for them to advance on. All these things come back down to the realm of policies, procedures, compliance, sort of the written word on paper. So yeah, it's really important. And unfortunately, too many people, I say cushy punches of the world or sweet leaves of the world. There's time and time again where examples come up where these businesses just didn't care. And you see $60 million businesses go down the tubes, $9 million fines in California with cushy punch. I mean, it's just crazy.
Yep, or all the stuff that was happening with ease as well. I mean, there's just a lot of it. And then ultimately, what does that do to both the business reputation, your personal reputation? I mean, this is a pretty small industry as far as in your reputation is going to follow you. I mean, just like in business, that is one of our sort of key attributes that it's really, really difficult to come back from that by making a short-term call of, I don't need to follow those rules.
Yeah, the brand risk alone is huge. And there's a lot of people that go into the licensing business. So if you're, say, Wana Brands does this, Wana doesn't own every operation in all the states they operate in, but they'll license out their brand in multiple states. And you better be really, really clear with who you're hiring to run your brand in that state, because if they are also doing things inconsistent or non-compliance, now that brand risk is not going to come back and bite XYZ operator that has the license for Wana, right? It'll end up hurting Wana's reputation. That's just one example. But there's lots of businesses that do that. All these really nationally known brands generally operate on licensing deals like that with operators in local states.
But just think, I mean, when you talk about, you're right, reputational risk, brand risk, but on a global level, the industry risk. So every time this is happening, with industry, it starts to come to the forefront as a face of the industry, and that's what we're trying to get away from, right? Isn't that that's what we were trying to get away from? So we're trying to show, and we're trying to put these processes and best practices in place for people to follow, so that the industry, shows that it's a legit industry and it's, wants to be profitable, wants to
professional,
wants to provide good product. I mean, that's what the goal is. So
I completely agree.
you don't want to taint the industry, with some of the, maybe not so compliant players.
Yep, because that's plastered all over the news every time that something like that happens, and it's look, this is why this is such a bad industry.
It gives everyone a black eye, and then it becomes harder for legitimate operators to be seen as legitimate. Right. So it's the job of the regulators is come to the orchard and pick out the good apples and the bad apples. I mean, that's really kind of their job, is to make sure that the industry has integrity. And you guys are right. I often say that it's like that black eye just hurts everybody. And I think you hit the nail on the head, Josephine. Legitimacy is what we're going for in this industry. And the way to do it is compliance. It may be boring, it may be non-sexy, but it does gain that professionalism and that legitimacy, because we're already fighting stigmatization that's been around since Prohibition, right? Your grandma's generation kind of thing was seeing this as something really bad. And cannabis users are lazy and, all the stereotypes. And that's what we're trying to fight is really that stigmatization, so that cannabis can be more liberalized and be more available on a commercial level, so that we all kind of win and profit, get it out of the hands of the cartel. There's a bigger mission here and a bigger goal that compliance serves, and it's in that legitimization of the industry.
Definitely. So, and that ultimately, that kind of comes in with an organization, and we've mentioned this topic a couple of times about internal controls. So I know that you hear that term. I know it was new to me, particularly in the financial world and in the accounting world of internal control systems and those developed up. But what are they? I mean, what does that term mean? Why are they in place?
I live and sleep internal control. I I love internal controls.
And I
you
love
know.
my controllers.
I love it. I've been working in internal control since my banking days. So, an internal control environment should be prevalent in every industry and every business. The smaller the business, the less um, controls in terms of segregation of duties, things like that, because it's too small for that. But there are even just basic controls. So the term internal obviously means, within the organization itself. Let's say an internal audit, is done internally to maintain that you're in compliance with different things, right? So as opposed to, let's say, an external audit, which would be something the CPA firm would be doing and preparing, financial statements, for an organization. But internally, they follow what we call the COSO framework. Don't ask me to, it's a committee on sponsoring organizations, but that framework is a framework of internal controls. If you guys remember, and if, the audience listening knows, you've got the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, and it was basically to institute these controls to deter possible inconsistencies in compliance, to deter fraud, to deter different things. So you're basically testing the process. So you're putting the process in place and tweaking it along the way, and it's evolving, but then you're testing it. So it's always best to have someone responsible for compliance testing within the organization. So whether that be, do we test the product? What are our controls over cash? Because cash and inventory are the bread and butter of the dispensary, right? So you've got to secure and safeguard those assets. So you want to secure your cash, and you need to secure your inventory. Now, how are you going to do that? And those are the internal controls that you're putting in place to secure those assets.
Stuff like multiple signatures, source documents on ensuring batch numbers. I'm just thinking of some different things of
Production,
dual segregation, where you have dual oversight over something. Never make one person responsible for everything. This person's counting the cash, this person's reporting the cash, this one's putting the cash in the vault. No, you need to kind of separate those functions, because it causes someone to really be cognizant that somebody's watching over me. I'm going to do this one piece, maybe I do a cash count, but then someone else is going to test that I counted that correctly. They're going to sign off on that. Again, it's the chain. It's the chain of custody of cash. How is cash getting from A to B? How is inventory getting from A to B? Those are the type of controls that you're putting in place, is that management oversight and or some type of segregation of the functions in order to deter, any issues with fraud.
See, and I found with employees as well too, that you kind of explain the why and you help to show them, because you got to think of anybody in on an entry level position coming in. They're around a lot of cash. They're around a lot of inventory. There certainly is that sort of thought out there that we've all seen the articles about things related to robberies and other stuff like that. And there's a possibility of being around that you can help to give that peace of mind to your staff of, this is compliant, you follow these things this way. This helps to ensure that you've CYA.
Well, it's like approving invoices, if something needs to be paid, right? What's the easy way to account for that is we need approval, right? Somebody has to approve it. So who's the responsible party to approve this invoice if it's, $1,000 and over? And I'm just making the threshold that depending on the operation. So let's say it's $1,000. Well, Mary X needs to sign this if it's over $1,000, and then it gets paid by someone else. But you want to see, I want to see that. I want to see your signature. I want to know who's accountable for that transaction and how it got from here to there and why money would go out the door. I mean, one of the things we used to see back in the banking days, which is prevalent in cannabis, because you're dealing with cash, and you're dealing with cash drawers, and the tellers, when we used to do, back in the old days, when we used to go in and do an audit in a branch, we would do it first thing Monday morning before the tellers even showed up, because what was happening is they really weren't maintaining any certain controls for those tellers in terms of counting their draws and locking up their cash. And what they end up doing is borrowing money over the weekend, to pay their expenses. And then Monday morning, they would bring the money back in, put it back in their cash drawer. So when we used to get there way earlier than the tellers did and open up their cash, we would see a lot of cash missing. So, you can't look at these procedures on a monthly basis. Sometimes you're dealing in cash. It might be every day, every week. I mean, there's going to be different levels of testing that you do on a daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly basis.
Recurring, it keeps going.
Yeah.
And from a compliance control standpoint, a lot of it boils down to things like access control. So physically securing your inventory, right? There's points in the cultivation process where a gram or two can go missing, and you've got a bunch of stoners and people that like marijuana working for you. You might want to physically secure that and make sure that people that are only allowed access there, that have been trusted, that have been verified for a while, are accessing that. So I think of controls in a lot of ways as sort of a trust but verify system, right? You trust people to follow the SOPs, but you need to verify it. And how do you get in there and verify that? Well, things like automation, I love automation. So electronic access control will tell you, and people can come or not and enter or not a specific area. Even looking over the cameras periodically during the day or during specific vulnerable moments of when you're counting cash or things of that nature is a good idea to just get in the regular habit of doing, especially if you start noticing, $5 go missing from the till or something like that. So you're setting thresholds for day-to-day activities that would warrant supervision or management. And then the other big thing you can do is just when you're defining roles and responsibilities in your procedures is you don't train everybody that comes into the organization on all of the very sensitive things that happen in the business. I've seen this happen time and time again where it's like, I'll just put a body there and I hope it works out. And this person's worked for the company, less than 2 weeks or something like that. So there's always sort of like hiring your tech 1 and then your tech 2 and give them a career path that gives them more responsibility as they prove themselves, right? You give people privileges without them earning it. They tend to just abuse those privileges. So there's just the reality of dealing with humans as well and making sure that you trust, but verify. And with enough verification, you can build more trust.
And the deterrence comes in, like the fraud deterrence comes in when employees know that there are these procedures in place to that oversight, right? So if you know that and you know that somebody's going to be checking, I mean, it doesn't mean that fraud doesn't happen, but that deterrence level, at least them knowing that, okay, somebody's going to be looking at this. I need to be accountable for this. If it's not done, I'm accountable, and there are repercussions of, doing things incorrectly and not following the procedures.
You're deterring the opportunistic individuals to where, because most shrink comes internally. I mean, it's studied over and over again. It's upwards, I think 85% is the number that I keep seeing of, and a lot of it is don't tempt people. Don't create a circumstance where you don't have something in place that they know that things are being monitored. I mean, that's part of something as simple as everything here is on camera. We do spot checks of sales. Even just communicating that is going to let your staff know, hey, okay, all right, I need to do things the right way, not from a scare perspective, but I'm just going to take away that temptation that is potentially there.
Yeah, or just the nature of forgetfulness, right? If somebody else is there to double check inventory documents or production batch records that are fulfilled out at the end of the day, then if you do notice something's missing, you can repair it right away. You can go get that answer. You can get that log out time on the visitor log that they forgot to put in for the visitors that came in that day, right? Mm-hmm. There's just little things like that when you have another level of accountability or control over the top of it, that you can just hold people accountable for just slip ups in human nature, give them a verbal warning, hope they don't do the behavior again and move on. But there's sort of malicious intent, and there's just like, the human nature to slip the train off the tracks if you're not watching, if you don't have a conductor up there putting those controls in place and making sure that train stays on the tracks.
Plus, like you said before, with complacent, like even with what appeared to be, a good internal control environment, you get complacent because even from a fraud deterrence standpoint, there's always a workaround. I mean, if somebody really wants to do something, they'll figure it out. I mean, it can be done. So the last thing you want as management is to be complacent and think that, okay, we've got everything covered and everything's like solid. There's always little holes that could get poked in any internal control environment.
That's why I think, Josephine, it's really important that you also have third party come in and validate.
Absolutely. Well, right.
Because
Well, that's
then
the purpose.
if it's
Right.
systemic or if it's
Sure.
something somebody's been going around, right? So it's great if you count your own inventory. We recommend you do that all the time.
Oh, absolutely. Sure.
Probably wouldn't hurt to have someone like I could come in with no vested interest and a trusted reputation to also count it and let you know, hey, there is stuff missing. You've got over and unders over here. I don't know why your staff didn't catch this. We might want to investigate this further. And we find that all the time, even in places who think they have it together, right? Because everybody thinks they have it together. Nobody wants to look bad, and everybody, just human nature, wants to look good. But oftentimes, math doesn't lie. That third-party validation can come in and provide new perspective, whether it's on your SOPs, your packages and labeling, right? Your required documentation, internal books and records, or things like inventory.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, and it's not going to be necessarily at the same frequency unless you have major problems, but from a cost perspective, I mean, you're going to test and you're going to have a process in place to test internally, and then the external people like yourself, Mark, and me, even from a financial standpoint, are going to come in, perhaps from a financial standpoint, maybe once a year to do that testing, but you're doing it internally, on a periodic, consistent basis, to then have the external people then kind of verify again.
Exactly. And all right, it's ironic because like the more people use us, the less they need us.
Right.
So we almost work ourselves out of a job at some point, to your point.
Right.
But that's great. I mean, that's what I really want to have in the industry is for you to need us less often. It would be great if I only have to come in once a year and just, yep, you got it right. Oh, there's still these issues. Let's work through those. And, then we're also on phone calls every other week with our clients.
Right.
And say, okay, what's the agenda items from our last audit, from our last inventory? Did we get that fixed?
Mhm.
Do we have a better system we can put in place? Do we need to develop new SOPs? Because back to Caleb's point, it's always a process of ongoing continued improvement.
Right.
That's what compliance really is.
Mm-hmm. It's accountability, ultimately, of creating that system and that structure of accountability for internally, externally, of being walking the walk is kind of a good way. I think too, all of the preparation and things that we would do on a daily basis, well, operating, knowing that we were going to have inspections twice a year from Department of Health. When we got the notice, we would go and look and say, okay, there might be like 1 or 2 documents that maybe is missing out of our 1,000 because we have a process in place, and those were from human error and because that stuff happens. Yep. But it wasn't, oh wow, like I need to look back at the last 6 months and scramble and what am I doing, and all that energy and that
panic mode.
yeah, versus just, okay, all right, let's go look back. Here's our system. We're going to identify the couple of things we might have missed, and our inspections always went smooth. I mean, we would always get kudos from the regulators of just like, thank you for being prepared and helping make our lives easier too.
And that's the type of client you want to be, and that's the type of operator you want to be, right? Where you're not panicking, you're able to say, yeah, no, come on in. Look at all this documentation I already did. Is there anything else you need? The goal is to get them in and out of there quick because you've already done it right and you're proactive about it. So yeah, it's absolutely an investment that pays off in the long run.
Yeah,
and let me say, one of the major, one of the things I see a lot, and it makes me nervous, of course, is when I go into an operation and their financial records are not current. And I'm not talking about a month behind, I'm talking like 12 months behind, so that's certainly high risk. I mean, and even for the operators, I mean, not having a sense of what's going on. I mean, that's the purpose of,
yeah, how can you run your business without knowing where your cash flows are on a daily?
Right, you have no idea. You cannot, and that's usually, in a lot of the distress situations and or even not in this industry, but in other industries from a bankruptcy standpoint, what was their downfall? A lot of times the downfall was bad accounting records. They didn't maintain them. They didn't know how to maintain them. So nobody knew how they were really operating. So
Yep.
definitely something to.
Yep. So we're getting close to the end of our time. I think that's a great point to finish on. And I definitely can echo that of seeing a lot of clients of that is one of the big areas that is not given as much focus, and it is so much work to try to clean up and go back and get things. So it's very important to get that chart of accounts, get those things set up on the front end, and getting the professional services that you need to get that solid foundation, that solid framework. So I wanted to give an opportunity for each of you, if there's any advice for the aspiring social equity applicant. They're really at that stage of developing their compliance programs, their plan of what they're potentially going to do. So I want to go ahead and open it up.
I mean, I'll say real quick that, basically try to stay on top of what's going on. Go to industry resources, see what's changing from a regulatory environment within your jurisdiction, really be up to date about what needs to be done to be in compliance, and understand what those regulations are that you're trying to do. Then secondly, bring in the right people, whether it be, the attorneys, the CPAs, the, consultants to help you, to get you started. You might not need them on a daily basis forever, but to get yourself off the ground and to get that solid basis, so you can move forward and be successful.
Yeah, but I would say, to any of the social equity applicants out there, and Arizona is a very tight market, so there's not going to be a lot of licenses that are going to be available for social equity, and Colorado, unfortunately, is kind of the same way. They've made it really hard to qualify, so it's a difficult program. Having said that, 99% of people don't win applications and licenses. So if you are really serious and you really want to make sure that you're going to be in that winning category, then it's important that you make sure that you're operating within the parameters of what it takes to win. So we do, 90-minute consults for $420. We can let you know based on your team, your budgets, where you're at, what it is you're trying to do, what you need to do next, and whether or not you're going to even be in the same ballpark, the same major leagues as some folks that can win. And if you're not, we can help you get there, but you're going to have the money to do so. You're going to have the resources to get there. And that can be really challenging for social equity applicants. And last thing I'd want to see is anybody with a hope and a dream have it dashed because they're not prepared, or they're not doing things the right way with the right people. And I think that's where we can really help guide people and offer some perspective as to whether or not there's some viability there, and knowing what league you're really playing in, or is there something else you can do, or what do we need to do to get you there? And I think that's the most important thing I can share with any potential social equity applicants.
All right. Well, thank you both for your time today. We unpacked just maybe the ribbon of the compliance package. So a couple things just to leave everybody with is ultimately it's accountability, it's risk mitigation, it's the framework, it's the rules of this is how I play the game. And if I follow them and focus on that, then I know that there's not going to be any regulatory bodies that are necessarily preventing my success. I can focus on driving revenue and helping my customers. All right. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Josephine, again for your time today. And yeah, go Suns.
Thank you. Thanks,
Thank
guys.
you. Take care.